Hi, my name is Eleanor Zambrano, and the reading I decided to focus on for this assignment was Early Wire Sculpture and Biology of Equality by Jason Vadekar. This essay talks about the artist Ruth Asawa and her wire sculptures and their connections towards biology and equality. Before So the thesis for this essay states that this essay argues that Asawa's biomorphic wire worlds evoke biology, specifically the proliferation of cells, embryos, and invertebrates from early epochs, as a metaphor for racial equality. So before we get into this presentation, I just want to get you guys, started. So Ruth Asawa was a Japanese sculptor, and in this essay we talk about her early works and how she began her journey towards using biomorphic terms and ideas to work with the ideas of racial equality and such. So the first thing we got to talk about is Asawa's early interests in biology. She had always had an interesting connection towards the subject. For her first term at Black Mountain College, her art teacher at the time, Jean Verada, was able to connect art terms to her along with those of biology. So they would use a lot of examples in their lectures and stuff to that of biology terms, and in that time she was able to find her love towards the subject along with her working in her biology classes at the time. So this first image we see on the left is an image of an eye diagram by Asawa, which she drew from her biology course from Black Mountain College. And in it, we could still see her sense of organic line to that of science. And while it is just an image of a sculpture, an image of an eyeball from, just for her to create, you can still see her own artistic style come through in it, especially in, if we could see at the top of the eye, her use of like very free flowing lines is very relevant to that of her later works and sculpture and such. Another thing that was a catalyst towards her enjoying biology was her being given an engraving of Medusa Magellanic's starfish from that of John Wilkes, showing an organicness of sea life through its patterns. So that's the right image we see here, and in that image we could see a starfish, a Mangalic starfish. There's another term for it, but in the starfish, we could see the connections through the legs, through all the different flowing forms and how they're able to intertwine and interconnect with one another. And when we see this engraving, you could see how prevalent it is to her later works in sculpture. So in her beginning journeys of sculpture, she got interested in the subject of it or the materials that she used during a class trip to Toluca, Mexico in 1947. And while she was at this class school trip, they saw a group of villagers crocheting wire into egg baskets. And when she saw this, she was, she thought it was so beautiful, and seeing how they were able to utilitarian material and bring it into a solid form that was able to house other objects like that of the eggs. And this would suggest a living form with a replicated pattern. So if we look at this image of the sculpture, that one of her first sculptures she ever made, it is very, very similar to that of the starfish engraving we saw in the previous slide. And they all connect somehow because it shows her beginning to go into the route of biomorphism in her sculptures. She would also, at this time, create sketches of like twinning nucleus and other biological life forms in her sketchbooks and outside of her biology notebooks, just for the fun of it, because she found herself really loving the subject at the time. And another thing the essay brought out is that her sculptures would also be seen as a pattern that could be suggested as cell division in hereditary particles, and how those forms are seen in a scientific standpoint to now an artistic one. So racial divide. This is a really big thing that drove her artwork at the time. So Asawa herself believed that humans are too biologically alike for racial hierarchy and to be scientifically valid as like having anyone above another. These ideals of her were strengthened after World War II. After the Japanese attack on the U.S. Pearl Harbor, Japanese Americans at the time were racially profiled to an extreme extent, and it was a catalyst to a large racial separation between Americans and that of Japanese Americans. So at the time, the government was stripped away Asawa's parents of their property, separating her family into different incarcerated war relocation centers. So they'd put them in camps at the time. And Asawa and her family were actually separated, or a lot of her family members were separated into different camps. Asawa was able to leave after a year or a little less than a year, because she was permitted to leave the camp to get an art teaching certificate. And this certificate was presented from the Milwaukee State Teachers College. However, she was unable to attend the college for more than a semester due to rampant prejudices against Japanese Americans, and mainly Asawa herself. It was a very dangerous situation for her, so she had to leave the college. However, this came in at a somewhat good thing, though, because it was actually a catalyst for her future artworks and her getting into Black Mountain College. So Asawa went to Black Mountain College during the school's experimentation with integration. The school at the time was known to house liberal avant-garde artists and surrounded. However, while this school was very known for their avant-garde and racial integration at the time, the surrounding community around this school was very deeply steeped in racism, to the point where the school itself was located in a group of forest kind of in the middle of the woods somewhat, but those around them would actually burn a lot of the trees at the college, and there was a lot of racial profiling towards Asawa and a lot of her other classmates. So this piece right here is titled Untitled, and it's a hanging two-lobed continuous form and is one of the earliest surviving sculptures of Asawa's that traces nuclear twinning cells. So one of the earliest scientific biological sculptures of hers, which is symbolic of the world's universal particles, which is then symbolizing races being all connected. And the work is displayed. This work was displayed among other similar biomorphic forms inspired by biological sciences. So at the time, there was other artists at the time who had the same ideals as her, and she would be seen with the same artist. And one of the examples was Isamu Noguchi. I don't want to get too much on the topic of him, but he was also, um, like Asawa, really believed in racial equality. So the next couple slides are just going to talk about her different examples with biological terms and how she was able to connect this in her sculpture. So this sculpture showcases her ideas on cells. And in one of her earliest drawings from her biology notebook, we see this idea being formed. So this piece from 1957, which is also untitled, showcases an overlapping form similar to her early sketches, which suggest orbs of nucleus bubbling away from one another from the main parent cell, separating its daughter cells, which suggests mitosis. And when we look at the word mitosis, the term itself comes from the Greek word thread, which implies the idea of stitching the cells all together and interweaving them. And this is also brought in with her weaving of her materials. And this idea shows Asawa's ideals of no longer identifying as Japanese or American, but as a citizen of the universe, and how everything is connected and intertwined and interweaving. This sculpture showcases her ideas about DNA and is a wire sculpture technique that resembles that of a helix structure of DNA. And the technique she would use would unwound and rewound the strands into newer crochet techniques, which is prevalent in that of DNA. So we'd have a large coil with a helix-like configuration showing wires that would create new DNA from that of old DNA. So the crocheted wire mesh would allude to that of a micro layer and what the essay suggested, encasing all cells in an equal skin, which also is prevalent in equal race. And this last piece of verse is a sea lily representation, also untitled, and it is a rendering of a sea lily invertebrate that was believed to be more than 500 million years old, which is really interesting, I thought, while going over the piece itself. So this piece would show the movement in creating invertebrate forms from zoology type sculptures, and she was also into sea animals and stuff, as we can see through a lot of her projects too. So in this one, we see from the textbooks that Asawa read that she really fell in love with the sea lily. And in this piece, we see a woven wires curling up, kind of in a paddle-like movement, ready to kind of float up and getting ready to propel itself away. The tentacles are similar to that of a jellyfish, and the message from this piece conveys that biomorphic forms are all humans emerge the same equally. So how we're all, floating up into the world at an equal standpoint. But yeah, I thought this essay was really interesting and how they were able to showcase through all these pieces how Ruth Asawa was able to connect racial equality and biomorphism in all her pieces. I thought they were all very beautiful, and I hope you guys enjoyed. Sorry if I was a little all over the place, but thank you. To use this